Hello and welcome to English Chapter, the place where stories speak and English comes alive. Today, we're about to explore the life of a man who transformed how we communicate, how we listen to music, how we learn, and even how we dream. This isn't just a story about technology. It's a story about vision, failure, courage, and starting over. A story that teaches us the power of believing in yourself, even when the world says no. This is the extraordinary journey of Steve Jobs, told in simple, powerful English to help you grow your language skills and your mindset. Let's begin. Steve Jobs was born on February 24, 1955, in San Francisco, California. But right from the beginning, his life didn't follow a normal path. He was put up for adoption. His biological parents were two college students who didn't feel ready to raise a child. But there was a couple, Paul and Clara Jobs, who promised they would give Steve a good life. And so they did. Paul was a mechanic, a man who worked with his hands. Clara worked as a bookkeeper. They weren't rich, they weren't famous. But they gave Steve something more important than money. They gave him love, structure, and curiosity. Steve was a curious child. He asked questions all the time, sometimes too many. He wanted to know how things worked, why things were the way they were. He would take apart radios and machines just to see what was inside. His father noticed this and encouraged him. Paul taught Steve how to build things in their garage. He showed him how to focus on the little details, even the ones nobody else would see. That lesson stuck with Steve for the rest of his life. "When you're a carpenter making a beautiful chest of drawers," Steve later said, "you're not going to use a piece of plywood on the back, even though it faces the wall. You'll know it's there, so you'll use a beautiful piece of wood." That mindset, doing things beautifully, even if no one else sees, became a core part of how Steve built products. Early school days, Steve wasn't a perfect student. In fact, he often got bored in school. He was smart, very smart, but also stubborn and independent. He didn't like following rules just because someone told him to. In 4th grade, his teacher saw something special in him and challenged him. She gave him difficult problems and even bought him a kit to build a camera. Steve responded by working hard and even skipping a grade. But by high school, his interest in electronics and pranks had grown. He made friends with another student who also loved electronics, a quiet, shy genius named Steve Wozniak. Wozniak, or Woz, was the kind of person who could build a working computer from scratch. Steve Jobs didn't have Woz's technical skill, but he had something else. Vision. He could see how Woz's inventions could change the world. Together, they were unstoppable. The blue box. Before Apple, there was the blue box. In the early 1970s, Jobs and Wozniak built a device that let people make free long-distance phone calls. It was illegal, yes, but it also showed them something powerful. They could create something that people wanted. They could sell it, and they could build a business. This experience gave them the courage to do more. It planted the first seeds of what would later become Apple. The birth of Apple. In 1976, when Steve Jobs was just 21 years old, he and Wozniak started a company. They called it Apple. Why Apple? Steve once said he liked the name because it was fun, spirited, and not intimidating. And also because he had just come back from an apple farm. Simple as that. Their first computer, the Apple I, was built in Steve's parents' garage. They didn't have money. They didn't have a big team. But they had an idea, and they had belief. Steve sold his Volkswagen van. Wozniak sold his calculator. That's how they got started. They built and sold 50 Apple I computers. Then came the Apple II, which was a breakthrough. It wasn't just for hobbyists, it was for regular people. It had a screen, a keyboard, and software you could use at home. Apple became a real company. The rise. By 1980, Apple had gone public. That means they started selling shares of their company to the public. Steve Jobs became a millionaire at age 25. At 26, he was worth over $100 million. But he wasn't interested in money for its own sake. What Steve wanted was to change the world. He started dreaming of a new kind of computer, one that was beautiful, one that was simple, one that anyone, not just computer geeks, could use. That dream would become the Macintosh. By the early 1980s, Apple was flying high. Steve Jobs was becoming a legend. Young, bold, and intense. He wore jeans and a black turtleneck, walked barefoot in meetings, and spoke with the energy of someone on a mission. But while Apple's success grew, so did Steve's ambitions and his ego. He believed Apple could create a computer that would change the world again. Something revolutionary, something personal. That idea became the Macintosh, the dream machine. Steve didn't just want to make another computer. He wanted to build a tool for the mind. The Macintosh had a graphical interface, pictures, icons, and a mouse. No confusing code, no green text on black screens. It was friendly, it was fun. It was a computer designed not just for engineers, but for everyone. Steve poured his soul into the project. He pushed the team hard, sometimes too hard. He demanded perfection. He screamed at people. He fired people without warning. But he also inspired them. He had a field around him. People called it the reality distortion field. It meant Steve could convince people to do the impossible. He believed it so deeply, they started to believe it too. One engineer later said, "We did the best work of our lives because Steve made us believe we could." The big launch. On January 24th, 1984, the Macintosh was launched. Steve stood on stage in front of a huge crowd. He smiled, clicked the mouse, and the Mac said its first words, "Hello, I'm Macintosh. It's nice to meet you." The crowd erupted. The future had arrived. The Macintosh was beautiful, smart, and full of personality, just like Steve. Apple ran a famous TV commercial during the Super Bowl, directed by Ridley Scott. It showed a woman smashing a screen controlled by a big brother-like figure. The message was clear. Apple would break the chains of conformity. It was bold. It was rebellious. It was Steve. Trouble behind the curtain. But behind the scenes, cracks were forming. The Macintosh was too expensive. It was also underpowered. While people loved the look and feel, they needed something faster and more useful for business. Sales were slow, and Steve, who was once the golden boy, was now seen as a problem. He was difficult, impulsive, emotional. He clashed with the CEO he had hired, John Sculley, a former Pepsi executive. At first, they were close. Steve even asked him once, "Do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life? Or do you want to come with me and change the world?" But soon, they began to disagree on everything, especially the future of Apple. The board of directors had to choose between the two. They chose Sculley, and in 1985, at just 30 years old, Steve Jobs was fired from the company he had built. Lost and wandering. Can you imagine? One day you're the face of innovation, a millionaire, a pioneer. The next, you're out. Unwanted, alone. Steve later said, "Getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me." The heaviness of being successful was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again. But at the time, it didn't feel like a blessing. He was heartbroken, embarrassed, angry. He felt like a failure. But Steve didn't stop. He couldn't. His fire was still burning. So he started again. A new beginning. Next. After leaving Apple, Steve founded a new company called Next. The idea was to build a computer for universities and research. Something powerful and elegant. The machines were gorgeous. Black cubes, beautifully designed, full of advanced features. But they were expensive. Too expensive. Next didn't succeed commercially. But it wasn't a waste. The software they built would later become very important. Pixar, a different kind of computer magic. Around the same time, Steve bought another company, a small animation studio from George Lucas, the creator of Star Wars. He named it Pixar. At first, it wasn't clear what Pixar would become. They tried selling hardware. It didn't work. But they had something else: brilliant storytellers and animators. Steve believed in them. He invested his money and his heart. For almost 10 years, Pixar didn't make a profit. But in 1995, everything changed. Pixar released the world's first full-length 3D animated movie, Toy Story. It was a smash hit. Critics loved it. Audiences loved it. And it made history. Steve Jobs was back, but in a very different way. This time, not as a tech guy, but as a producer of dreams. The comeback begins. Meanwhile, Apple was struggling. Without Steve, they had lost their magic. Their products were confusing. Sales were falling. The company was bleeding. In 1996, Apple made a surprising move. They bought Next, Steve's company, for $400 million. And just like that, Steve Jobs was back at Apple. At first, he was just an advisor. But within a year, he became CEO again. The man who was once kicked out had returned to save the company that fired him. It was one of the greatest comebacks in business history, changing everything again. Steve cleaned house. He cut failing projects. He simplified the product line. And then he introduced a new product, the iMac. It was colorful, playful. It had a handle, and it came with just one cable. The iMac was a hit. It brought design and fun back into computing. It made Apple cool again. Steve wasn't just back, he was better than ever. But this was only the beginning. The real revolution was still to come. Steve Jobs had returned to Apple like a storm, cutting waste, focusing the team, and reminding the world that Apple was different. But he wasn't done. He didn't just want Apple to survive. He wanted to reinvent everything. And he started with music, the iPod revolution. In the early 2000s, music was a mess. People were downloading songs illegally. MP3 players were confusing and clunky. Steve saw a problem and a huge opportunity. He asked his team a bold question. What if you could carry 1,000 songs in your pocket? The team at Apple worked fast and secretly. Within months, they had it. In October 2001, Steve walked onto the stage and pulled a small white device out of his jeans pocket. "This is iPod," he said. 1,000 songs in your pocket. The world had never seen anything like it. The iPod wasn't just about music. It was about freedom. You could go anywhere with your entire music library in your hand. No CDs, no wires, just click and pee. People fell in love with it. And once they had an iPod, they started looking at Apple differently. Redesigning the world after the iPod, Apple wasn't just a computer company anymore. It was a lifestyle. Steve focused on design. Every detail mattered. He would argue for hours over the color of a button, the curve of an edge, or the sound a laptop made when it closed. He believed that design wasn't just how something looked, it was how it worked. He pushed the idea of simplicity, clean lines, no clutter, easy to use. This thinking led to the creation of the MacBook, the iTunes Store, and more, each product more elegant than the last. But there was one product that would change everything. The phone that changed the world. In 2007, Steve Jobs stepped onto the stage at the Macworld conference. He looked at the crowd and smiled. Today, he said, Apple is going to reinvent the phone. He announced a device that combined three things: a phone, an iPod, and an internet communicator. The audience was confused. Then, stunned, it was all one device, the iPhone. People had never seen anything like it. No keyboard, just a touchscreen. It was smooth, fast, and smart. And it didn't just make phone calls. It played music, browsed the web, showed maps, took photos, and more. Steve called it a leapfrog product, a device that would jump far ahead of the competition. He was right. The smartphone era begins. The iPhone exploded. In its first year, it sold over 1 million units. Soon, other companies rushed to copy it, but Apple stayed ahead. They launched the App Store, letting developers build tools, games, and services. Suddenly, the phone became more than a phone. It became a platform for connection, creativity, and business. Steve's vision wasn't just about building a phone. It was about putting the future in your hands. And with the iPhone, he had done it. From one to many, each year, the iPhone got better, faster, smarter, and Steve kept pushing. He once said, "Some people say, give the customers what they want, but that's not my approach. Our job is to figure out what they're going to want before they do." That's how Apple stayed ahead, not by following trends, but by creating them. Then in 2010, Steve introduced something new, the iPad, a bigger leap. It looked like a big iPhone. People laughed. Who would want a giant phone? But Steve had a vision. The iPad was perfect for reading, watching videos, playing games, and browsing the web. It was faster than a laptop and lighter than a book. Once again, Apple had created a new category, and once again, Steve stood at the center, calm, focused, and brilliant. iCloud and beyond. Steve's last big project was iCloud, a service that connected all your Apple devices. Photos, messages, music, everything synced across iPhone, iPad, and Mac. It was a quiet revolution, one that made digital life seamless. With iCloud, Apple wasn't just making devices. They were building an ecosystem, and it worked together like magic. The shadow in the light. While Apple was rising, something else was happening, something darker. In 2003, Steve was diagnosed with a rare form of pancreatic cancer. At first, he kept it private. He didn't want the world to know. He tried alternative treatments. He delayed surgery. But the disease progressed. He looked thinner, weaker, but he kept working. He still took the stage, still introduced new products, still led with passion and fire. Even when he stepped down as CEO in 2011, he stayed on as chairman, always close to the company he loved. Final words. Steve Jobs died on October 5, 2011, at the age of 56. the world stopped. People left flowers and notes at Apple stores around the globe. Presidents, business leaders, artists, and everyday people shared how he had touched their lives. He had built more than machines. He had built tools for the heart. And he had shown us that technology, when combined with creativity and boldness, could change the world. Steve Jobs was a visionary, a genius, a rebel, and a perfectionist. But he was also human. Behind the headlines and the product launches, there was a complex man with deep emotions, painful regrets, and a fire that never went out. This is the side of Steve Jobs that people don't always see, the personal side. A complicated family story. Steve's journey with family started with abandonment. He was adopted. That truth shaped him. It gave him a deep need to prove that he mattered, to himself and to the world. But strangely, when Steve had his own daughter at 23, he denied she was his. Her name was Lisa Brennan Jobs. Her mother, Chris-Ann Brennan, was Steve's high school girlfriend. For years, Steve denied paternity. Even as he built Apple, he avoided his own child. It wasn't until later, after DNA tests, lawsuits, and personal growth, that Steve accepted Lisa into his life. He named one of Apple's early computers after her, the Apple Lisa. He didn't talk about it much, but in later years, he admitted how wrong he had been. "I didn't handle that right." He told friends, "I wish I could go back and do it better." That regret stayed with him. Love and commitment. In 1991, Steve Jobs married Laurene Powell. They met at Stanford, where he gave a talk and she was a student. They fell in love quickly, quietly. They built a life away from the cameras. Together, they had 3 children. Steve worked hard to protect their privacy. He didn't want his kids to grow up entitled or in the public eye. At home, he was often intense, but he loved deeply. He would talk to his kids about ideas, about books, about values. He once said, "I want my kids to know me. I wasn't always there, but I tried to give them what mattered most." The Steve Jobs leadership style. Ask people who worked for him what it was like, and you'll hear a mix of awe and fear. Steve could be harsh, demanding, even cruel. He would call work garbage to someone's face. He could walk out of meetings without warning. He pushed people past their limits, but many say it made them better. Because Steve also had vision and taste. He could see greatness, and he would push people until they saw it too. He wasn't easy to work with, but he inspired loyalty, passion, and pride. "He could tear you apart," said one Apple engineer, "and then make you feel like you were part of something that really mattered." Jobs didn't manage. He led, and people followed because he made them believe they were building something bigger than themselves. Simplicity as power. One of Steve's deepest beliefs was in simplicity. To him, simplicity wasn't about removing features, it was about clarity. He said, "Simple can be harder than complex. You have to work hard to get your thinking clean to make it simple." That belief shaped every Apple product, from the single-button mouse to the clean white iPhone to the one-word slogans in Apple ads. He hated complexity. He hated buttons. He hated clutter. He once made a team spend months redesigning a single screw because it looked wrong. To some, that was madness. To Steve, it was the difference between average and iconic. His mindset. Steve Jobs didn't believe in playing it safe. He believed in leaps. He took risks. He trusted his gut. He didn't do focus groups. He didn't copy others. He once said, "Innovation distinguishes between a leader and a follower." He lived that idea every day. If something felt wrong, he killed it, even if the company had spent millions on it. If something felt right, he would fight for it with everything he had. He trusted intuition more than data, and that's what made him different. What Steve believed in? He believed in the intersection of technology and art. He believed that the user experience was everything. He believed that to change the world, you had to love what you do. He believed in saying no to good ideas so you could say yes to great ones. And above all, he believed in trusting your journey even when you don't understand it yet. His final years. In his final years, Steve slowed down a little. He focused on design, on products, and on passing the torch. He had deep talks with Apple's new leadership. He mentored younger entrepreneurs. He spent more time with his family. But the illness was catching up. His face was thinner, his body weaker. Yet his mind was still sharp. Even from a hospital bed, he approved product designs. He discussed the future of Apple. He didn't give up. He worked until he couldn't. The legacy. When Steve Jobs died in 2011, the world didn't just lose a businessman. It lost a force. He didn't invent the computer. He didn't invent the phone. He didn't invent animation. But he reimagined all of them. He made tools that became part of our lives, tools that felt like magic, and he reminded us that one person, with courage, vision, and obsession, can create something that changes the world. Steve Jobs didn't just leave behind products. He left behind principles, ideas, habits, beliefs, things that can change your future, not just in business, but in life. Let's dive into the mindset that made him who he was and how you can apply it to your own path. Follow your curiosity. Steve was endlessly curious. As a kid, he took apart radios and machines just to see how they worked. As an adult, he asked questions no one else dared to ask. He didn't wait to be told what to do. He looked around, saw what was broken, and imagined something better. That's where greatness begins. If something catches your interest, follow it. Even if it seems silly, even if no one else understands. Curiosity is the start of passion. Passion is the start of purpose. Connect the dots. Later, Steve dropped out of college, but he stayed on campus and dropped in on classes that interested him, like calligraphy. Years later, when designing the Mac, he used what he learned to create the first computer with beautiful fonts. "You can't connect the dots looking forward," he said. "You can only connect them looking backward." The lesson? Trust your path. Not everything you do will make sense at first, but if you follow what feels meaningful, the pieces will fit together in time. Focus like a laser. Steve believed in saying no, not just once, but all the time. He knew that focus is power. Every time you say yes to one thing, you're saying no to everything else. When he returned to Apple, the company had dozens of products. He killed almost all of them. He said, "I'm as proud of the things we didn't do as I am of the ones we did." The result? Clear vision, fast progress, real results. Ask yourself, what do I need to stop doing so I can start doing what matters? Make it beautiful. Steve believed that even the inside of a product, the parts no one could see, should be beautiful. Because beauty isn't just about appearances, it's about respect. For the user, for the work, for yourself. He raised the standard. He showed that you can take something practical and make it poetic. Whatever you create, a resume, a video, a business, a meal, treat it like art. Make it with care. Make it with love. People feel that. Stay hungry, stay foolish. This was Steve's most famous quote, the final message in his Stanford graduation speech in 2005. Stay hungry, stay foolish. It means never settle, never believe you've arrived. Always stay curious, brave, willing to take risks. Don't be afraid to look silly. Don't be afraid to fail. Great things come to those who stay bold, those who keep learning, those who never stop chasing the next idea. The fire inside you. Steve wasn't perfect. He made mistakes. He hurt people. He changed his mind. He lost battles. But he never lost the fire. The fire to build something better. The fire to make things simpler. The fire to change the world one idea at a time. That fire lives in you too. Imagine this. You wake up tomorrow, but instead of scrolling aimlessly, you sit down and start building. You write, you code, you paint, you design, you speak. You take what's in your heart and bring it into the world. That's what Steve did. He wasn't smarter than everyone. He just believed harder, worked harder, dreamed harder, and refused to give up. So, what can you do today? You don't need to start a billion-dollar company, but you can start showing up. You can start focusing. You can start believing that your ideas matter, because they do. Maybe you start writing your first book, or building your first website, or recording your first podcast. Maybe you teach yourself a new skill. Maybe you finally stop making excuses. Whatever it is, start now. Start where you are, because one day, someone may tell your story the way we're telling Steve's. Final thoughts from Steve. In one of his last interviews, Steve said this: "We're here to put a dent in the universe. Otherwise, why even be here?" He lived that truth. Now it's your turn. You don't need permission. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to begin. Steve Jobs is gone, but his spirit? It's everywhere. It's in the phone in your pocket, the music you stream, the way you swipe, tap, speak, and dream. He didn't just change technology. He changed how we live, learn, create, and connect. But more than that, Steve Jobs showed us what's possible when one person, one ordinary person, dares to think differently. He was flawed. He was fierce. He failed. He fell. But he never stopped believing in the power of bold ideas. And that is his real legacy. Not the iPhone, not the Mac, not even Apple. His real gift is belief. Belief that the future can be better. Belief that beauty matters. Belief that passion is worth fighting for. Belief that you, yes, you, can build something that matters. So as we close this story, remember, you don't have to be a genius to change the world. You just have to care deeply, work relentlessly, and never settle for less than what you're capable of. The world doesn't need another Steve Jobs. It needs you, at your most focused, fearless, and authentic. So stay curious, stay brave, stay hungry, stay foolish, and go make your own dent in the universe.